Good morning, good morning, good morning. Welcome to another episode of the Buckeye Roast. It's your boy Ron James here with my guy Pat of Menace to Sports. Pat, how you doing?
I am good, Ron. I'm good. Just chilling. Fine Tuesday morning. Looking forward to talking some Buckeye stuff. How are you doing?
Pretty good, pretty good. Our guy Q hit us last night and said he wasn't going to be able to make it. And super thankful Pat was able to jump in to save the day. So the show goes on. We got a packed schedule today. We're going to be talking about running backs, all kinds of stuff. Running backs, camp, Michigan, all of those things. It's been a busy week in college football. We haven't talked to Pat in a week, so I want to get his thoughts on some of the news of the weekend. We'll jump right into it. Buckeye football is officially back. The pads are on in Columbus and the Buckeyes are hitting. I just wanted to get your thoughts out of from some of the camp reports that we've heard. We've heard, well, Howard has more zip on his ball. We see it seems like there's plenty of depth throughout the quarterback room. Quinshawn Judkins looks like a beast. Caleb Downs is picking off Julian Sane. What jumped out to you from the camp reports this weekend? Anything stand out about the news from the Buckeyes?
I mean, I feel like all eyes and all focus is on the quarterback battle right now for obvious reasons, and it looks like Will Howard is beginning to separate himself in terms of his ability both as a runner and a passer. I heard he had I think it was Saturday, he had a long run down the sideline that would have went for like a big touchdown. But it's good to see that at least someone is starting to pull away with the job, because I don't want this thing to drag on much longer. I know Day had mentioned that he wants this to kind of be decided within the first 10 days of camp. So if it keeps tracking this way, it sounds like we're on that path for Will Howard to be named the starter. Although it seems like from what I read, that his deep ball hasn't been impressive so far. Actually, Devin and Julian Sand have thrown better deep balls throughout the first 4 practices. So I would like to see that improve. Especially, I think that's the one thing that this offense could really benefit from, this season is the ability to throw the deep ball and take the top off the defense to just, when you have this kind of run game, to kind of keep the safeties from just playing in all the time against us and loading the box. That's going to be, very important, I think. So I'd like to see that improve as the week goes on. But for the most part, yeah, I'm just excited to see that Will is doing as well as, we've hoped, bringing him in from K-State.
Yeah, man. We went through the numbers last week when we talked about Will Howard and Kyle McCord by the numbers, and we were shocked by how high Kyle McCord's deep ball numbers were, and Will Howard, that was probably his worst statistical category that we saw last year. Do you think the wide receiver depth and the scheme at Ohio State is going to give Will Howard an opportunity? Maybe if the deep balls aren't the most accurate or always exactly on time, do you think he'll still be able to improve that category with the talent that the Buckeyes have at wide receiver?
Absolutely. I'm pretty certain that his numbers are only going to go up from there. I mean, you saw McCord was number 1 in returning Power 5, like we talked about last week. And I think a lot of that had to do with the skill positions around him, including Marvin, obviously. So I think, with this, Carnell Tate has drawn, great reports so far. Jeremiah Smith, with all the hype around him, I think that we'll definitely see an increase from Will Howard this year, just solely based off of those guys being able to create more separation than what he's probably used to with, his tenure at K-State. I'm sure I'd have to look into the numbers a little bit, but I'm pretty sure that I could say with confidence that Ohio State receivers are probably going to get more separation than his guys at Kansas State. So I think that's something we'll see improvement on. And you hope that Ryan Day, has an influence on that too, being the quarterback guru that he is, and he'll be able to fix some things with Will's deep ball that he, maybe didn't have access to with the coaching staff at K-State. So those are my thoughts.
I'll save you a little time. You don't have to dig up any stats. Marvin Harrison Jr. was better than any wide receiver at Kansas State. And I feel like the Buckeyes pedigree with Jeremiah Smith, Carnell Tate, and Brandon Ennis coming up, I think those guys will be able to fill those shoes admirably, and they're going to be able to carry the torch just like the guys from Zone 6 before them. I wanted to get your thoughts on a couple other things that happened over the weekend. Is it almost hammer time? It feels like the hammer may be coming to Michigan, but then we see our guy Pete Thamel, Buckeye legend, if you listen to Michigan fans, Pete Thamel in the tank for the Buckeyes, out here saying that he doesn't think the hammer's coming for Michigan. The leak notice of allegations comes out this weekend. It sounds Like there's 5 level 1 allegations coming against or violations coming against former Michigan coaches. It seems like the NCAA is out for blood, but then it seemed like a lot of people are walking back those reports, and it doesn't seem like there's going to be that big of a punishment. What do you expect? And were you surprised by the leak this weekend?
I wouldn't say I was surprised by the leak. I feel like this stuff always happens nowadays, with especially the connections that ESPN has. It's no shock that they were able to get their hands on this. I think there is some sort of punishment coming. I think maybe Pete Thamel was trying to just pump the brakes to slow everyone's expectations a little bit. But I'd be shocked if there wasn't any sort of substantial punishment, especially for Sharon Moore with his role in it as the acting head coach. I think there's a chance that we see a suspension coming from him in the future. It may not be this year, but it might be the following year after that. I feel like he has to serve some sort of suspension from, his role in this, the same way Harbaugh, sat out 3 games last year when this report, first came out about the sign stealing scandal. I also think, maybe they would be wise to inflict some self-punishment before the NCAA rulings come out, to try to maybe get ahead of that. And like we were talking about it on Minnesota Sports yesterday, because Michigan lost so much on offense this year, and yes, they're still going to have a loaded defense, but because they're losing their starting quarterback and all 5 offensive linemen and one of their starting running backs, the expectations for them aren't as high this year. Granted, it's hard to implement a postseason ban the year after winning a natty because you don't want to automatically ruin your chances of going back to back and kind of cementing yourself as maybe building a legacy. But with the expectation of Ohio State being as dominant as they're going to be, Oregon being a step ahead Michigan this year, let alone, all the top dogs in the SEC with this expanded playoffs, I honestly think it wouldn't be that, much of a mistake for Michigan to implement some sort of postseason ban this year to maybe, hopefully that takes the ease from the NCAA a little bit, to take it easy on them in terms of maybe less vacated wins or something. I don't know, but it seems like something is going to come of this, and I wouldn't be surprised if we see vacated wins, a postseason ban, or a suspension at some point for Sharon Moore.
Do you think Michigan's pride's going to get in the way? They've been adamant about fighting this fight. It would seem like almost a concession to come out and agree to any sort of penalty and just self-impose anything. Do you think they're going to try to take the stance that we didn't do anything wrong and fight this to the end? And if they do that, could that come back to bite them?
Oh, absolutely. I think they will do that, and I think it's going to bite them. I think, at a certain point, you just have to swallow your pride and, admit that you royally messed this whole thing up by with this elaborate plan. The fact that Harbaugh, I think, already came out and said he knew nothing wrong was going on, which just screams complete BS to me. But I think they will fight it because that's just kind of their MO recently with their griefs with the NCAA over the past, what has it been, like 4 or 5 years now, dating back to like the Burger Gate. So I think we'll see them fight regardless of what the penalty is that the NCAA drops on them. But I do think I think there is some sort of hammer coming, and I think that the guys, like Pete Thamel and Paul Finebaum at ESPN, were just trying to let everyone simmer and not overreact. But I think there's something coming.
There's been a lot of speculation around where and why these leaks are coming out now. You have the Connor Stallions documentary coming out at the end of the month. What do you think the relationship to these leaks is to the University of Michigan, ESPN, the NCAA? Who benefits the most from this information getting out here like this?
That's a good question. I would say the NCAA probably does because it gives them, a little bit, especially with the public documentary coming out from Netflix. I'm sure they want to make sure that people don't think that they're just sleeping on this whole thing and that, how is Netflix able to get a story out before the NCAA can conclude their investigation? So I think definitely it benefits the NCAA for them to maybe quote unquote leak something, whether it was on purpose or not. So I think that would be my best guess as to, who benefits the most from it. I don't really think Michigan benefits anything because it's still unknown as to what the punishment is going to be. It'll be interesting to see how much they reveal in this documentary. If this is just going to be following Stallions and his whole, mastermind plan behind the whole thing, the manifesto, or if this is going to go, deep into the university and the other coaches that were involved. But from what it sounds like, it's just going to be a Stallion story and him telling his side of it. The question is, will they make him out to be like a villain, like a super villain, or more so, is he going to take the role like, oh, it wasn't, like pity me, it wasn't my fault. Like I, was just trying to come up with this, everyone steals signs. I didn't think it was illegal type of shit. So I don't know.
Yeah, I thought that this might be a deep dive where you might learn something or something might get revealed negatively about Michigan in this doc. And then I saw Dave Portnoy in the trailer and I was like, there's no way he's signing up for that doc if it's a Michigan hit piece. It was like when we saw Urban Meyer in the Florida Gators doc. You're like, oh, well, we're not getting the real story if this guy's signing off on anything going on. It feels like almost the NCAA was trying to get out ahead of Connor Stallion's denial of accountability in this whole situation. And I feel like when this documentary comes out, it's going to be painted in a way that this was advanced scouting in a gray area within the rules. Nothing wrong was done. He was painted out to be the villain, and he's kind of wearing the stain for the University of Michigan. And it feels like they're almost going to make him into like some sort of cult hero. And I don't think that's something the NCAA wants at all. They want to get ahead of this. And I'm surprised they haven't went for a pound of flesh, because at this point, if Michigan gets away with this, what jurisdiction does the NCAA have at this point? If they feel like they're mentioning in the notice of allegations that the integrity of the sport is at risk and all of these things. Well, if that's the case and the only problem is a fine, if you got the deep pockets, what's stopping you from doing anything that you feel is necessary to win a national championship, even if it means breaking rules or working in the gray areas?
Yeah, I agree. And like you said, I think that's another reason why I think the NCAA is going to drop a pretty harsh punishment on Michigan, is because another thing is that they hate, not being, like followed with and not being, compatible with someone. And Michigan is constantly, year after year, pissed off the NCAA in one way or another, not following, correct order of, business in terms of conducting, these investigations and cooperating with these investigations. So I think the NCAA is just ready to pounce on them. And I think we're going to see something come relatively soon if the draft is already out there. Although I guess I was reading yesterday that, I don't know, is this the final draft? Like how many drafts of these, notice of allegations do you go through? Because if this is the final draft, then, I would imagine that it's almost, time to be released for good. So I think we could see something soon. I don't know if that's just like the rough draft. Are they going to go through 10 more drafts of this thing before it's released? I don't know.
Yeah, it definitely seems like this wasn't it's definitely evident that this wasn't a finalized copy. Which direction that the newest draft goes in, more harsh or less harsh, is definitely to be seen, but definitely a story that we will have an eye on going forward. A couple house cleaning items before we get before we get on to the next subject. A big shout out to our guys, Charles Green, the first person in the chat today. Shout out to him. Shout out to everyone in the chat. I see our guy Chris Drew in there, Cheddar, Craig, Johnny, of course, Matt, Chris, all of our OGs that are in here regularly. We appreciate you guys pulling up here this morning. Again, a big thank you to Pat for filling in for our guy Q. Hope he gets better. I wanted to get your thoughts on another story that came out yesterday around the Buckeyes. New Ohio State Athletic Director Ross Bjork came out and said that he is open to selling the naming rights to Ohio Stadium. And it seemed to cause quite the stir on Twitter. Our guy Cam had a tweet talking about how he's been a big supporter of Ross Bjork, but not a fan of this idea just because of the history of Ohio Stadium. Ohio Stadium built on the donations of the people of Ohio to build that stadium when the state wasn't ready to build a stadium for Ohio State. Just your overall thoughts. It seemed like the timeline was pretty split. A lot of people were out of the opinion of, you know what, the heck with tradition. Do you want to win or not? Get the money any way that you can. And I'm usually of that mindset. And then you also had people on the other side that are like, is nothing sacred? We have to protect the name of the stadium. Do we have to sell it? Where do you stand on this issue? Do you like the idea of selling the naming rights of Ohio Stadium?
Personally, I'm for it. As a Cleveland sports fan, like I've seen the, Jacobs Field turn to Progressive Field and Cleveland Brown Stadium become First Energy Stadium. And even like I grew up with the Quicken Loans Arena, and even that had to change to the Rocket Mortgage Field House. It's like I'm used to stadium changes throughout my sports fandom. But honestly, it's just like people will still call Progressive Field the Jake. People will still call whatever they change Ohio Stadium to as Ohio Stadium. It's not going to really I feel like to the true fans, it's not going to matter what they change it to. It'll always be known as what you want it to be known as. And so I think with the way college football is growing and changing and evolving, you have to stay with the times, and there's no reason to put yourself back when other schools are going to be doing this. I get it. It's tradition and you want to hold on to that. But at a certain point, you don't want to end up like Clemson and the way Dabo Sweeney has just, he doesn't want to touch the transfer portal because he doesn't believe in that. And he believes in his guys, and the guys that stick with the program initially are the ones for him. He's not going to poach talent elsewhere. And look at Clemson's kind of drop off in recent years. You don't want to see that, with Ohio State by refusing to adapt to the times and any sort of, way you can get some extra money nowadays with how prevalent it is to pay a roster. I mean, this roster this year is costing us $20 million, and Bjork has already said that he expects that number to increase, during his tenure, with all the small businesses in Columbus and the size of the city and the donations that he expects from those businesses. So why not go for it? Change the name, throw a patch on the jersey if you have to. I mean, we saw the New York Yankees throw a Star Insurance patch on their jersey. If the New York Yankees are capable of doing something like that and breaking with tradition, I think Ohio State will do the same thing.
Definitely a fair point there with the Yankees. I mean, they don't break tradition for anything. So to see them to go for a money grab like that, it definitely is a bit eye-opening. I'm kind of on the fence with this one. I see both sides of the argument. I definitely understand wanting to protect tradition, but I mean, also coming from a guy like me that's been screaming from the mountaintops, stop talking to me about money at Ohio State. Like, money is never an issue. It never runs out. Like, you guys have one of the largest alumni bases in the country. You're able to pull from all sorts of resources, and it makes me think back to the Gene Smith Dilemma video that we did last season, or maybe even 2 years ago now, where we talked about the size of Ohio State's athletic department. And it always seems like when it comes time to make these tough decisions financially or sacrifice some sort of level of tradition for the almighty dollar, that it's asked upon by the fans to continue to donate, or it's some sort of back or falling out for the football team. It's like we have 38 varsity sports at Ohio State, and with this changing landscape of college football, we're now asking fans to continue to donate more money to fund the operation. We're changing the name of the stadium. At what point does it not become feasible to run an athletic department the size that Ohio State does when you're trying to compete at the highest levels? And what do you have to be able to sell because you're supporting such a large athletic department on top of funding one of the most expensive football programs in the country? I just don't. When we talk about changing landscapes, it always makes me harken back to, you don't see anyone else that's competing at this high of a level as Ohio State with an athletic department as large as it is. And when you do that, you're going to have to make sacrifices. And when you're supporting that many sports, you're going to have to continue to find that funding. When NIL rolled around, we always knew this was going to pull money from the athletic department. Now that they're having to pay players, they're having to even increase their athletic department revenue even more, whether that's be through donations, selling tickets to practices. So it seems like the dollar is going to become even more and more and more important in college athletics, especially now that these schools are going to have to dish out money out of their own pocket. And I feel like this is one of the consequences. And with Ohio State having an athletic department as large as they are, they're going to have to make some of these decisions that maybe some other schools won't have to make because their budget isn't as large and they don't have to support as many sports. But at the same time, hey, if all you're doing is changing the name of the stadium and you don't, I feel like there would be more outcry and more outrage if Ohio State starts chopping sports versus change the name of the stadium.
I think that's the main reason why they're, kind of toying with these ideas, is because there will be such an outcry if they start, getting rid of the lower end sports because of, Ohio State, obviously, first and foremost, is a football school. But I feel like the university takes pride in winning national championships throughout the scope of the athletic program. So I think you'll definitely get an outcry from people if they start doing that. So I think it's just another way that they're going to continue to make money. And I think another thing with this offseason in particular is how much noise that Oregon is, drum up with the large backing that they have with Nike and Phil Knight. I mean, Ohio State doesn't have that kind of, multi-billion-dollar franchise behind them. So I think that could be also playing a factor with what Bjork's saying right now. Because of the resources that Oregon has, I'm sure he's not going to shy away from any sort of advantage that he can get financially in order to help bolster the program.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think the decision is just the lesser of two evils in the changing landscape of college football. The money is going to have to increase, and they're going to have to get it by any means. And if the decision comes that they have to sell the naming rights before they end up getting rid of sports or asking the NIL collective to supplement that $20 million in some way, I think it's just the new landscape that we're in, and that's where college football is heading. And I mean, I would much rather see the naming rights go at Ohio Stadium than the Buckeyes fall behind, like the point you made. Like, we've seen the slide at Clemson recently of not being able to get with the times. So if it's part of the changing landscape, I guess that's just what the Buckeyes have to do. I honestly don't love the idea of the name changing, but at the end of the day, if they feel like that's going to help the entire athletic department win and the football team, that's what we're looking for. I just wanted to get your thoughts on, what do you think the biggest driving factor is behind this? Do you believe it is the changing landscape of Ohio State football or the college football game? Do you think it's an SEC mentality that Ross Bjork is bringing to Ohio State, or do you think it's something that maybe Ross Bjork just doesn't get as a non-native Ohioan, that maybe he just doesn't understand what this means to certain Buckeye fans? What do you think is playing the biggest role in this decision to explore this avenue?
I think the biggest thing is he is taking over a program with so many resources that he didn't have previously. And I think that he is kind of just like, almost money happy right now with the idea of so many different streams of revenue coming in. Like, why not? He's already got all these, 30,000 businesses and the, million of people that live in Columbus already. Why not? All right. Oh, we can make money by changing the name of the stadium. Oh, we can make money by putting patches on the jersey. Like, I think he's just in full go mode right now and creating as much, revenue as possible and as much financial backing as possible to hopefully, I hope that his end mindset is to just create a dynasty here at Ohio State and become, that, legendary athletic director that could, really turn this program around by all means necessary, defeating Michigan and reclaiming that throne of, atop the Big Ten and winning national championships. So I feel like at least that's what I hope that his mindset is behind this whole thing. Whether that is or isn't, I guess we'll see in his, in the coming years of his tenure. But I think a lot of it really boils down to the fact that this is what we're getting with the new evolution of college football. It's a pay to play kind of game now. It's no longer, so much on recruiting and development. While that may be true with, Michigan last year, I think you're going to start to see, few and fewer instances of those kind of national championships, especially with the expanded playoffs. It's going to be the teams that pay the most money. I mean, that's kind of the way that we're going. I mean, it's almost like you compare it to, any other professional sport. The low market teams, it's so hard for them to win nowadays because of the big spenders. And you have a team like the Dodgers in baseball that'll go out and spend $1 billion in the offseason versus the Cleveland Guardians who spend, $20 million. And so I think that's just kind of the changing, landscape of sports as a whole. And now that it's trickled down to the college level, Bjork is trying to do his best to get ahead of it so that they don't fall behind. And I actually commend him for it. And I hope that, he continues to explore all these, revenue options. Whatever brings us a winner I'm on board for,
That's pretty much where I'm at. I'm so thirsty for a win against our rivals, a Big Ten championship, a national championship. If they think this is going to win games, I mean,
I'm all
who am
for it.
I to argue with it? But it definitely does feel like the college football landscape is turning into Madden Ultimate Team. Whoever spends the most is gonna have the
Yeah.
best roster. No salary cap here. If your credit card is approved, they're gonna keep letting you rip open packs.
It's so true, man. It's literally what it's becoming. Just buying your whole roster.
Absolutely. We have a comment here from our guy Dan. Here's an idea. Sell the naming rights to DSW and we can still call it the shoe. Problem solved.
That's brilliant. I love that idea.
I think we need to make Dan the new AD because he seems to have the right idea. But
Absolutely.
we have the main topic on the graphic here. We did a stats breakdown last week when you joined us. We talked about how does Will Howard stack up against our guy Kyle McCord, and we wanted to jump in and do another breakdown across the landscape of names that we're familiar with in the college football realm. And we have a breakdown today of the Ohio State running back duo in comparison to one of the other more dynamic running back duos in the country, Penn State's duo of Katron Allen and Nick Singleton. So I wanted to dive right into the numbers. We got the graphic up here on the screen. Our guy Trey's face is a little hidden. Our guy Quinshon's face is a little hidden, so I will move that. But just looking at this graphic initially, we have yards per attempt, yards after contact, missed tackles forced, runs of 10 plus yards, 15 plus yards, first downs, and then the last statistic on the graphic, BAY percentage. Pat, let the people know a little bit about that breakaway percentage number.
Yeah, so breakaway percentage is it's the amount of runs that each running back had that was considered a breakaway over the length of 15 plus yards. So that means without a defender, within 2 yards of the player when he, reaches his max speed is considered a breakaway. So as you can see here, Travion was the most explosive out of those 4 backs in terms of that breakaway percentage. You can see almost 50% of his quote unquote long runs went for a breakaway, which speaks to his home run hitting ability as a running back. I was surprised to see Quinshon with only 27.5% of his runs with that breakaway speed, but I think a lot of it has to do with the number of carries that he had versus Travion. He almost had double the amount of carries last year. I get that Travion was hurt, and also that Quinshon was basically run to the ground at Ole Miss. So I feel like that percentage is skewed a little bit for that reason. But yeah, there's a lot to break down in terms of all these stats. The one that I found most interesting was Quinshon clearing the pack by a large margin in terms of missed tackles forced with 78. The next closest out of these 4 is Katron Allen with 37. And that was 22nd in the country in terms of returning backs from last year's production. Quinshon was second with 78. I think that's going to pay huge dividends this year, running behind an established offensive line way better than what he was working with last year at Ole Miss.
Absolutely. That was the number that also jumped out to me the most when I looked at this, because all you've heard is about how shifty and how fluid Quinshon Judkins is. And then you see the numbers that truly back it up. And it feels like that was an element of the offense that we've been missing for a couple years. There's been questions about running back vision. You saw Travion Henderson really take a step last year as he was fully healthy, but it still felt like we were missing an element of people getting tough yards, making guys miss. It almost felt like our guys kind of went down at the first tackler. You see where Trey ranks 38th in that statistic. So it feels like we're adding another element to the offense where Travion adds that more explosive home run breakaway play. But even with the first down and 10-plus yard statistics, you don't see Quinshon Judkins with the crazy breakaway average that Travion Henderson has. But you see him keeping his offense on schedule. And we talked about that a lot last year with the running back debates that we would have on the show when people would be talking about put Chip Trainum in the game, the offense stays on schedule more, or Mine Williams in years past kept the offense on schedule more when Travion Henderson was hurt. I think Quinshon adds an element to this offense at a greater clip than those guys previously mentioned in Chip Trainum and Mine Williams, an ability to keep this offense on schedule and get those tough yards, and not every play not having to be a home run, but the ability to make it a home run too.
Absolutely. I mean, like you just said, keeping the offense on schedule. Quinshon with 73 first downs last year is crazy, ranking 5th in returning Power 5 running backs. And 39 rushes of 10 plus yards means that he's got, a little bit of that speed that Travion has. Obviously, he had more 10 plus yard runs than Travion, which again, points to the number of attempts and Travion being hurt. But the fact that we're going to be able to implement a sort of style at running back similar to what we saw with Michigan the last few years, with Blake Corum being that, down to down back that was shifty and able to get the, fight for extra yardage, and then you can turn it over to Donovan Edwards for the home run ball. I think we'll be able to see a similar package, with Quinshon and Travion. I think their games are similar to that of Corum and Donovan Edwards from the past few years. So I'm excited for that aspect of it. It'll be interesting to see how many times they, deploy both running backs in the backfield at the same time. I don't know if we saw much of that over the weekend in practice. I don't know if you have any insight on that.
What was the last part? I'm sorry.
Oh, you're good. I just said I'm interested to see, with Chip Kelly now, running the offense, how many times they'll deploy like a 2 running back set. I don't know if we saw that at all over the weekend. If you saw any.
No, we didn't. So we talked to Anand, and that was one of the questions I asked him. Did we see any 22 personnel packages? And they said no, but he also noted, I don't think that's something that we can completely roll out this season. You mentioned the comparison to Blake Corum and Quinshon Judkins, and I feel like that's the second time I've heard that in a week as far as that comparison. And when you see the missed tackle numbers, it felt like constantly watching Michigan. It was like, can no one tackle this guy? I mean, we know that Donovan Edwards was the guy who had the most success against the Buckeyes in the past few years, especially with Corum being hurt 2 years ago. But it's anytime you watch Michigan last year, it seemed like anytime Blake Corum was met in the hole with met by another defender in the hole, he was able to make them miss and fight for more yards. And he was so shifty. And I feel like that's something that Quinshon adds. And then when you hit the nail on the head as far as a comparison to that duo at Michigan last year. You hate to give them their flowers, but at the end of the day, it was undeniable how successful that running attack was. The Buckeyes have a veteran offensive line returning for the most part. And I think personally, while Travion Henderson is able to add that explosive home run ability that you see out of Donovan Edwards, I think down to down, Travion is a better back. So while he does add that home run ability, I feel like this duo could potentially be even more balanced than the Michigan duo last year. How do you feel like using these two to complement each other would best benefit the Buckeyes as far as a split in carries? I know in years past we would see Mayan Williams rack up tons of yards against tired defenses towards the end of the game. But with both of these guys feeling like RB1, I don't know if we'll necessarily see a situation where one guy sits for multiple series or waits till later in the game to get their touches. What do you think the best way to implement a rotation of these two dynamic backs would be?
I mean, personally, I don't see why you wouldn't go with a 1 series on, 1 series off kind of mentality early on. Of course, you don't want to take the ball out of the hands of someone who's quote unquote like getting hot and seems to be, kind of hitting that hot streak and looking good, breaking tackles and stuff like that. So I could see, that kind of, 4 or 5 touches. All right, get the other guy in 4 or 5 touches and keep rotating. That is what I think would be best suited for the offense. Then it also depends on how they want to, use both of them in the passing game as well. But I would like to see it kind of I think I said series of series. I meant drive by drive, 1 drive on, 1 drive off type of split between the two. I think that's the way to maximize both of them, without tiring either of them out and risking, injury. I think it's mainly important for Quinshon because of his workload over the past few years. I think he's going to benefit from that the most out of the two because he can conserve a lot of that energy. He was getting 20, 30 touches a game with Ole Miss. If he's only getting 10 to 15, I think he'll just be even that more explosive and that more shifty and that more eager to, create longer runs because he knows his touches are going to be limited. So I think we'll see it like a drive on, drive off type of balance in the workload. I don't know if you have any insight on that.
No, I was actually just going to mention, I'm sitting here looking at the stats. In addition to the stats that we see on the screen, you put together a composite ranking based on these numbers. You did a regular composite and an adjusted composite based on their carries. And I feel like the numbers speak to what you just said. You see Travion Henderson with the higher non-adjusted composite score. And then when you adjust it for the carries, you see Quinshon Judkins jumps ahead of him in that composite score. So it makes you wonder, even with less carries, a fresher Quinshon Judkins without the biggest workload in the SEC, how much more is he able to expand on some of those numbers? Does the yard per attempt increase with a lighter workload where he's taking less attempts and he doesn't have as many 3 yards in a cloud of dust type of runs where the box is completely stacked? Do we see his breakaway percentage increase because he doesn't have dead legs at the end of the season? We've had these conversations around Ohio State in years past with the wide receivers. Are we seeing dead legs? People questioning the speed of Garrett Wilson coming out of his last year at Ohio State, and then he goes and runs a 4.3 at the combine, and everybody's like, I mean, yeah, he's fast, but I didn't think he was faster than Chris Olave. And then you go and look at the snap counts and you realize that he's out there every snap. We're not rotating our receivers. He has dead legs from sprinting the entire season. Do we see the most dynamic version of Quinshon Judkins that we've seen in his career now that we're able to see this balance between the two?
Oh, absolutely. Without a doubt, we're going to see the best version of Quinshon this year. I think between the combination of a lesser workload and running behind a more talented offensive line, actually, and a third one you could argue is having, he was the main focal point of that offense in Ole Miss. Obviously, Jackson Dart was special, and I think he's going to be a good quarterback this year in the SEC, but they didn't have the receiving threat that Ohio State has. So the defense can't load the box against Ohio State the way that they did against Ole Miss last year. That is, of course, if Will Howard can't throw, then that kind of changes things. But with the anticipation of Will Howard being, a field general and being able to move the ball, at least in the short and intermediate game, obviously the deep game is still to be determined. But as long as Will Howard's doing his job on those short to intermediate throws, that's just going to open up the middle of the field for Quinshon to exploit, and to use his shiftiness and exploit the defense, out in open space. So I think we'll see that breakaway percentage go up, like you said, from 27.5, maybe somewhere closer to that 35-40% range. I think you're going to see more yards per attempt. Obviously, 4.3 last year is 78th in terms of returning running back production. I think you'll see that number increase to over 5, similar to Travion and Katron Allen last year. And the yards after contact per attempt was 3.21, which was 45th last year. Travion with 3.68. I think you see it again go up a little bit in terms to maybe over 3.5 because he's not going to have, like you said, that 3 yards and then the whole, defense kind of convulsing on him at once. So I think you're going to see an overall elite version of Quinshon Judkins this year. And it's going to be exciting, man, to watch what him and Travion can do out of the backfield. I mean, you're talking about two potentially 1,000-yard rushers, if not more than that. So it's going to be fun to watch.
Everyone seems to be looking at both of these backs as 1A, 1B. You see the argument in the chat going as far as who is RB1. I want to ask you a little variation of that question. If they're both RB1, 1A, 1B, you don't usually see RB1 in the late third quarter of a blowout or in the fourth quarter. Are you confident that the Buckeyes have enough depth to be able to get these guys off of the field early in games? Or do you feel like we're going to see our RB1, even though both of them are considered RB1, one of the two in games later than we would expect if they were the sole power back or workhorse back on the team?
I don't think so. I think they would be smart to get some of the younger guys some touches, early on in the season in those blowouts because of the fact that they're so, there's such limited depth at that position that I think it would benefit those younger guys like James Peoples to get those touches, during the blowouts when the backups come in. I don't see any reason why Travion or Junkins would have touches in the third quarter of a blowout. It's just like almost that year when Master Teague had almost 1,000 rushing yards as the backup. I think we'll see that kind of role for James Peoples this year. I could see him racking up crazy numbers because you don't want to play either of those two guys during a blowout because there's no reason to risk injury. And then you already have, it's such a top heavy room without very much depth that you don't want to risk losing one of those guys in the midst of a blowout. So I doubt we'll see one of the two get carries late in a game like that.
I agree 100%. I definitely don't think that it'll be to the degree that Master Teague was able to rack up 1,000 yards just because you have two backs ahead of what'll essentially be the person in that Master Teague type of role. But I definitely think it opens the door for James Peoples to have a similar statistical year that we saw out of Dallin Hayden as his true freshman year. Not as much of we saw Dallin Hayden have to jump in a much bigger role than we anticipated as a freshman due to injury. I don't think that's going to be the case, but I think he can put up a similar statistical year as Dallin Hayden had as his freshman year, just in that cleanup role, doing the Master Teague type of job at the end of the season. So definitely think it's going to be interesting to see who those guys are that assert themselves after Trey and Quinshon, just because you don't think that those guys are going to really be treated or you're going to treat both of those guys as your RB1, that you're going to try to keep them healthy at the end of the game. We didn't really hit too much on the Penn State guys. When we thought about this show idea, we really thought there was going to be more of a talking point between the two as far as a comparison, but by the numbers, it's not even close. We tried to put together a different duo of running backs with the four. Could we put together a better statistical duo than Quinshon and Travion? And it wasn't possible. You saw this two-headed monster over at Penn State last year. It was what people expected, what they're expecting out of Trey and Quinshon out of this backfield last year, and we didn't quite see it. It felt like the offense kind of stalled later in the year. What numbers really jumped out to you when you took a deep dive into the Penn State running back room?
Honestly, the biggest thing is I think Nicholas Singleton is severely overrated. He keeps getting talked about as one of these dynamic backs in the Big Ten, and the numbers really don't back it up. There's nothing. The highest rank he has in terms of returning, running back production amongst Power 5 schools is that first down. He had 38 first downs last year, which is 33rd, which is still 12 less than Katron Allen, and they had the same amount of carries last year. I think Katron had 171 and Singleton had 172. I think they were within one carry of each other last year. So for Katron to have more first downs, more 15-yard runs, more 10-plus yard runs, more missed tackles forced, more yards per attempt, more yards per contact, it's just like, and a higher breakaway percentage. There's literally nothing that Singleton did better than Katron Allen. I don't know why the carries were split so evenly amongst the two. I think if anything, Katron Allen needs to be the feature back this year for Penn State to kind of have a sustained offensive attack. I think it's got to be more of a, 70-30 or 60-40 split with the carries with them. I think, and I thought this 2 years ago when this whole two-back situation started for Penn State was that Singleton at times just seems to lack vision and doesn't have that same type of breakaway speed that Katron Allen does. And I think Allen is such a dynamic runner and brings so much more to the offense. And I think with all the question marks surrounding Drew Aller this year, and if he's going to be able to take that next step and, the question marks in terms of receivers that they have, obviously losing Keandre Lambert-Smith, that offense is a big question mark now. And I think they'd be wise to lean away from Singleton and kind of lean more on Katron Allen this season for them to be successful.
I feel like this past year, or for Penn State, reminded me of Trey's sophomore year when he was hurt and it felt like he wasn't seeing the field completely, and everybody's asking for, I may not be as dynamic and explosive, but some of the guys behind him seem to keep the offense on schedule. And I feel like Penn State went through a little bit of that last year where Nick Singleton is the home run guy, and when you look at the breakaway percentage, it would surprise you, especially that Katron Allen has a better breakaway percentage when, Katron Allen's biggest highlight is getting hawked down by Kenneth Grant, a defensive tackle. So if Nick Singleton's your home run guy and he has the worst breakaway percentage than your power back, it's like, well, we're here for the explosive play. They're not necessarily giving us that, and the other guy keeps us on schedule. I'm right there with you. I've been there since the beginning when both of these backs came in together. There's all kinds of hype around Katron Allen. He's running over linebackers in practice as a true freshman, and it just seems to be a guy that keeps their offense on schedule. But then there's also the counter. You could argue, with Drew Aller not being the most dynamic quarterback in that offense, really lacking a punch, do you have to just roll the dice with the guy that you think might be able to break one off and give you an explosive play out of the backfield? It's going to be interesting to see what that offense looks like. Do you have an opinion on which one of these guys is going to benefit the most out of the new offensive coordinator at Penn State? They go out and get the Kansas offensive coordinator. The offense is going to look significantly different than it did under Yurcich the year before. So any thoughts there if one of these guys is going to benefit more from this new scheme?
I maybe I'm just biased, but I can't ignore the numbers on the fact that Katron Allen is just such more of a dynamic back than Singleton. And until I see an improved vision out of Singleton and the ability to hit those home run balls, I'm still going to lean that Katron Allen is the better back, and I think he'll have a better year with the new offense, which hopefully allows for Penn State to be able to, open up the field more. And especially, they need Drew Aller to push the ball downfield more than he did last year. He was, ranking towards the bottom in terms of returning production, I know, in terms of yards per attempt and average depth of target. So if they're able to push the ball downfield, I think that really opens up things for Katron Allen to be that kind of back, like you said, keep the offense on check and on schedule. And if Singleton can learn how to hit those home run balls, I think there'll be a dynamic offense, but I just don't trust him enough to do that. Like you said, the 22.4% breakaway, ranking 75th in the country. That's just, I don't know. You can't have that from your home run back. So I think Katron Allen is due for a good year, and I think Penn State would be wise to give him, the majority of carries for them this season.
Agreed. It's going to be interesting to see if Will Howard can back the defense off. Will Howard. If Drew Aller can back the defense off a little bit for Penn State, you would imagine that this new offensive coordinator is going to look to really tap into Drew Aller's game and push the ball downfield. So maybe that can open up the box a little bit for these running backs. I just want to hit one last point before we get out of here. Our guy Chris Drew mentioned, I wish Trey avoided contact. You look at the numbers, and it speaks to the difference in type of runners that Quinshon and Travion are. And you would think with, Travion being the more home run guy and Quinshon being the guy that keeps you more on schedule, that, you would think that Quinshon's the power guy. And you look at these stats, and it's like Travion, it speaks to his seeking out contact. Trey sees a defender and runs at them full speed and tries to run through their face. And you see his yards after contact numbers speak to that. And then you see the complete inverse with Quinshon Judkins and his missed tackles force being so high in the country. You got one running back that's looking to make you miss, and you have another running back that's looking to run straight through you at full speed, and the statistics point straight to it.
Yeah, I wonder if we'll see kind of a different mindset out of Trey this year, knowing that he doesn't have to, be relied on as that top dog as much as he has been last year and the year before that, with someone who can be able to keep the offense on schedule and seek out that contact and someone with a heavy workload in the past know that, all right, my job is to just go for the long ball every time and just take the top off the defense in terms of on a breakaway. So I think hopefully we see Travion, become a more shifty version of himself and look for open space rather than to, see contact to run someone over and prove his worth as a big time back. I think he's best suited for those home run balls. So I think we might see a different mindset in terms of Trey this year. I think that'd be beneficial for the offense as a whole for sure.
Yeah, man. I think of a meme when I think of Travion Henderson. When he was a freshman after that Minnesota game, he's taking those screens for those long for all of those yards. He's breaking long runs early. And then towards the middle of the season, you started to hear, oh, you can't bounce everything outside. You're running away from contact. And Travion Henderson took that to heart. He said, I'm pussy. And after that day, he actively tried to run through every single person in front of him. They were like, Travion Henderson, stop bouncing it outside. And he's like, I'll never do it again. I'll run straight into the first defender I see from now on, because no one's ever questioning if I'm scared. And it seems like he took that to heart, because he's like, oh, I bounced everything outside. Watch me run through this linebacker. It's like, Trey, you could have went around him.
Yeah, I'm going to tag him in a tweet. Say, Trey, why do you always search for contact? You never take it outside, pussy.
Is Travion Henderson scared to run outside? That's the name of the next show. And maybe we'll see him start bouncing stuff again.
Exactly.
But, man, a big thank you to our guy, Pat, for joining us for the show today. Catch him on Menace to Sports. A new podcast just dropped for Menace members. So if you are not a member on the Menace website and you want to see more Project Pat, him and Ainsley have a show behind the members paywall. So if you're interested in more Pat, more than his weekly appearance or his Voice of God appearances on Menace to Sports, man, tap in and make sure that you go check out the new podcast. Did you guys settle on the name? What's the name these days?
So the name is the Laugh Track Trio. Ainsley kind of launched that one for us, and we went with it. So we had episode 1 released on Sunday, I think, to the members, and it's gotten good feedback so far. So we have a couple more. I think we've had 4 episodes recorded already that we've just kind of been sitting on in the tank, and now we're kind of ready to keep it rolling. Once a week we're filming, and it's more of just a conversational, like talking about life and our own stories and stuff like that, rather than give people a break from all the sports talk, and more so just a lifestyle type of conversational piece. So it's been fun. We're looking forward to it. But I appreciate you having me on here, Ron. I enjoy chopping it up with you these last couple of weeks, and looking forward to doing it throughout the season for sure.
Absolutely. Appreciate you joining us. Yeah, and if you want to check out clips from that show, I know Ainsley has a couple pieces of micro content from a few of your guys' episodes, so check those out on TikTok. If the people want to follow you or keep track of you outside of your appearances on camera, where can they find you, Pat?
Yeah, so I'm Pat_Cahill. That's CAHILL 8. That's my Instagram. My Twitter is same thing, but instead of Cahill with a CA, it's the letter K Hill 8. So those are my 2 social medias. So follow me on there. And that's all I got.
Big thank you to our guy, Pat. Sending well wishes to our guy, Q, who is under the weather. I'm sure he'll have no problem sweating out whatever he has in him in that 105-degree weather down in Arizona.
Oh, yeah, seriously.
Thoughts out to Q. I'm hoping he will be back in the next day or so. But, yeah, appreciate everyone tuning into this episode of the Buckeye Roast. I'm your boy, Ron James. If you want to find me on Twitter, you can find me at 2Ts. That's 2_TEES. If you're watching on Twitter, make sure you like the video, drop a follow, retweet. We appreciate all the new watchers in the Ohio State community. Shout out to you guys. Enjoying the show. We appreciate having you guys on board, and excited to be back doing this every morning. That was another episode of the Buckeye Roast. Go Bucks and OH.